Hello everyone and welcome. In today's session, we'll be examining how successful implementation of artificial intelligence and zero trust is greatly dependent on organizational culture. With the advent of generative AI or Gen AI, agencies are seeking ways to pilot, adapt, and apply this technology across business processes. One area of tremendous impact is in support of zero trust, but implementing AI and zero trust goes beyond the technical mechanics and requires a fundamental shift in business philosophy and organizational transformation. Organizational culture is not just a backdrop, it's a dynamic force shaping how technology is adapted, used, and integrated. Employees want to feel empowered rather than ignored, and the public must realize a positive customer experience rather than frustration. Join me and our guests as we explore how understanding and nurturing the right cultural elements can pave the way for successful AI implementation and robust zero trust security practices. Up first, I'm happy to welcome Jyothi Duggar. Jyothi is the Chief Information Security Officer of the Center for Information Technology at the National Institute of Health. We'd also like to welcome Dr. Joe Ronzio, the Deputy Chief Health Technology Officer with the Veterans Health Administration. Joining us from the private sector is Matthew Posad. Matt is the Chief Security Officer at KPMG. Also from KPMG, we want to welcome Tony Hubbard, the U.S. Federal Cybersecurity Leader at KPMG. Now, before we dive into the questions today, why don't you each tell us just a little bit about yourselves? Jyothi?
All right, thank you. So I'm Jyothi Duggar, the Chief Information Security Officer at the NIH for Center for Information Technology. But outside of that, I'd like to introduce myself from a holistic standpoint. So I'm also a wellness and life coach, dance director, mom of 3, have a podcast host as well. So I do a slew of different things, and I think today's discussion is especially a passionate topic for me to, how to drive culture is when you really look at things from a holistic point of view, with people being in the forefront.
Wow, you're not busy at all, are you? I don't know how you find time
to chaos.
I love it. That's great. All right, Matt, how about you?
Hi, I'm Matt Posad. I am the Chief Security Officer at KPMG, where I lead a converged security program focused on cyber, physical, insider risk, business continuity, resilience, anything and everything touching security. Came to KPMG after about 20 years in the federal space, where I spent that time at the Central Intelligence Agency, ultimately running their cybersecurity program within the agency as well. I don't have nearly as an exciting outside work life as Jyothi here, but I do sit on several advisory boards for George Mason University, where I can really help develop the next generation and give back to the community that's helped make me successful.
Well, that's outstanding. That's great. Joe, how about you?
Currently serving as the Deputy Chief Health Technology Officer. I greatly appreciate working with Craig Lugart. He's a visionary on how he wants things to work and how he keeps veteran focus. Of course, we're a bit spoiled given the fact that the office contains the majority of us are veterans. So myself, I'm still an Air Force reservist, serving as the commander of the 94th Aeromedical Staging Squadron down at Dobbins Air Reserve Base. I have the opposite background. I started 20 years in business, and then I moved into government by taking a commission in the active duty Air Force before going and seeking my doctorate.
That's outstanding. A little bit of background. I was Navy Reserve. You're Air Force Reserve. Oh, we got something in common, maybe. Tony, how about you?
Sure. Tony Hubbard, principal with KPMG. As Mike mentioned, I lead our federal cybersecurity consulting team. I've been with KPMG for 25 years. Prior to that, I was a cybersecurity auditor for the Internal Revenue Service, which obviously was a very interesting experience because we did internal cyber audits at the IRS. So in addition to being unpopular with the public, because we said we worked for the IRS, we were also unpopular internally because we did audits. But very much looking forward to the conversation.
Well, at least you'll be popular here.
Yeah, more popular here, I think, than anywhere near the IRS.
Outstanding. Well, thank you all for joining us today. And as always, okay, I'm going to direct the questions to one of you at first. But if you have an idea or a thought, and when somebody else is asked or answering a question, pile on top, jump right in, butt in. I mean, that's the best way to keep this conversation going and make it fun. So, Jyothi, I'm going to start with you. What cultural factors contribute to the successful implementation of zero trust across an organization's networks?
So at NIH, we started an initiative several years ago before Gen AI and Zero Trust kind of came about, where we really focused on the human side of things when it comes to cybersecurity. So we put the human first. When we talk about cybersecurity, it's always like people, process, technologies, but most people generally focus on the technology part and then maybe a little bit on the process, but not so much on the people. And there was a term in cyber where people were looked upon as like the weakest link. But we really wanted to change that mindset and really empower our people and bring them the skill set and also education and awareness that they need to feel empowered and do the right thing. So we started a whole cyber champions program at the NIH where we built in security into everyone's roles. And like you were saying, NIH is 27 different institutes. The main one of the main institutes is the Clinical Center, which is the largest biomedical research hospital in the country. And so we had to really make sure all of our doctors, clinicians, nurses, law enforcement, everyone understood like their role in cybersecurity. So we're taking that same framework that we already built several years ago into any technology that comes about, such as Zero Trust.
That's really got to be difficult, doesn't it? Because when you think about it, the cybersecurity and the aspect of security, it's not going to happen without the backing of the folks. So what you did is you came in from the ground and built it. How long does that take to do something like that?
It took us about probably about 2 years. We had to get leadership buy-in. So that's that. I would say
that could be the hardest part.
That's the second pillar. Yes, leadership, and leadership at all levels, but also leadership from the ground up as well. So it's not just executive leadership, but it's also helping all of our different stakeholder groups understand their role in security. So it wasn't just the security team's job to withhold the security posture of the organization, to help them really understand the role that they play.
Well, that's really insightful, because when you think about it, in reality, the C-suite is not necessarily the real leadership. The leadership is down in the groundwork, and the folks that are doing the job, they pick their own leaders. There's a natural leader, and finding that leader that can really drive the change is a hard job also to do. And the fact that you went there is interesting.
And we're all leaders in our own space.
Exactly.
So that's where I started from the holistic standpoint. So it's kind of helping people lead well from within. And if they're, mentally, emotionally, physically present and well, then they're going to make better decisions.
Well, that's really interesting. So, Joe, coming to you, I mean, this is the same sort of thing. What challenges might arise then when trying to change an organization's security culture to embrace Zero Trust and generative AI, Gen AI?
So again, I typically concentrate on the healthcare side, but within VHA, we do have a very strong governance model. So as Jyoti was just stating, we did it formally by establishing work groups, committees, and councils. So again, at the lowest level, you're going to have the work groups involved, figuring out how to operate at the lowest level within our clinics, within our medical centers. And then we're going to get our committees involved as we go towards the regional level. And then at the national level, we have our councils involved. So we make all changes right now from a healthcare system perspective and from an IT perspective involving all the shareholders.
In order to do that, how collaborative are these different, because the different bodies you're talking about are from down here to up here to the very top. I mean, that flow of communication has to be constant, doesn't it? And there can't be a fear of the information flow going back and forth. So how do you handle that, or how are they handled?
Within each committee and council, there's definitely points of contact that go down into the work group level. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of discussion. We also have dual membership. Different individuals are going to participate at both levels. So that stimulates more discussion, and having a very aggressive schedule sometimes on having work groups go ahead. Different work groups may meet twice a week at some points, depending on implementation processes and project cycles. While typically once you get to the council level, you're going to meet once a month.
So you're doing it as you need, and the flow is natural. You're keeping it natural. You're keeping that communication constantly moving back and forth, and you're not just meeting to meet. You're meeting when you have something actually to do.
And information to share. So different councils and committees will actually brief each other on the current statuses of projects to, again, build that continuity and to build that collaborative approach.
That's really cool because one thing that we can probably do without is meetings for meeting's sake in there. And the fact that you keep it like that keeps that flow going and keeps people involved and keeps them in there. So that's really fantastic. Matt, how can leaders foster a security conscious culture that aligns with the zero trust tenets?
I think there's a couple of things to that question. First, I want to artificially divide leadership into two groups: security leaders and business leaders. And I know that's a macro generalization,
Ooh.
but I want to start with security leaders. I think first and foremost, security leaders need to understand the purpose of the organization they support. By and large, organizations don't exist to be the most secure thing on the planet. That is not their ultimate goal. It's not why they exist. They might be servicing veterans. They might be conducting research and medicines. Security is an important aspect, but it is not the ultimate goal. Security leaders need to understand where they fit in, and they need to understand to minimize organizational risk. There might be smart areas to take some security risk. And if a security leader thinks security is first and foremost, they're not going to see where they fit into the big apparatus. I think security leaders also have a huge role in being able to talk about security in a way business leaders can understand. Too many security leaders are out there talking about CVEs and CVSS and bits and bytes and ransomware actors, and none of that means anything to a business leader. They have to talk about the impacts on business operations, on organizational goals and objectives, so they can help the business understand why security matters.
How it accomplishes the mission.
Absolutely. At the same time, the business leaders, one, need to be receptive to that message, and two, they need to be broadcasting that message widely across the organization. When a security leader stands up and talks, an organization says, well, that's their job, they're the security leader. When the business leader stands up and talks, the organization says, this must matter here. And it makes a tremendous difference when business leaders talk about it. So that joint understanding of the roles each play and the criticality of security to the business is paramount. I think after that, leadership has to understand, as we start to think about zero trust principles, what are certain behaviors that are never okay in this environment? What are our risk thresholds? Where are we willing to take some risk? And where are we saying this is above what we are willing to accept? Understanding those thresholds is really important for the third part, and that is your actions have to match your words. If you say this matters, if you say this is outside of our acceptable tolerances, and then you permit it anyway, any progress you've made culturally has been completely eroded because your actions are going to be what really carries the culture.
Really good point.
And then lastly, I'd say it takes time. Culture does not change overnight or over weeks or over months. It takes years and years to build the culture you want. We heard just 2 years over here, and I'd say that's probably a fast culture shift.
Exactly. I was going to say.
And so you have to constantly keep doing all of these things to build that culture over time.
Yeah, the reason it's only 2 years because Jyothi's really good at this. you heard all she does. But it's a very good point, though, that the culture shift is not an overnight thing. I mean, it is a generational type function in a lot of cases. And you see so many security officers sometimes get frustrated. No, we need to do it right now. By golly, you can't do that. You can't have that or it's not going to work. People will revolt. And if people revolt, guess what? You've lost the battle.
That's right.
At that point in time. So, Tony, go ahead, Jyoti.
Oh,
Jyoti.
is it okay to
Yeah,
step in?
yeah, always.
I just wanted to piggyback off of what Matt was saying on speaking the language of the business leader, but also speaking the language of all of your different stakeholder groups as well. Like when we had to go to the clinicians, we can't, like you said, we couldn't just go there like, well, we have all of these vulnerabilities that we found from this pen test, and they're just like, we're trying to take care of a patient here. Like, get out. So we really had to create the stories for them, or not create them, but paint the picture for them so that in a language that they understood, which we realized later on, like halfway as we're trying to build this culture change. Oh, we can't just go and talk about security to all of these stakeholder groups. We have to go in with the language that really resonates with them, and the cost of not doing security, like how would it impact them?
Exactly. It's not. They don't want to know what it is. They want to know why I have to. How is it going to stop or help my mission? in doing it. So that's fantastic. Tony, you're going to get the easy question. We always do this, Tony gets the easy questions.
Sounds good.
How can Gen AI enhance security within a zero trust framework?
So as Jyoti was, to follow what Jyoti was saying, there's certainly so many technical controls that can be considered, but it really starts and ends with the people. The people are our best asset, but they also can be our weakest link. Mm-hmm. So when you think about from that framework or with that baseline, then you start to delve into some of the technical areas. And sort of like any concept around AI, cyber is another example where anything that's manual oriented or repetitive keystroke kind of thing is right for an AI solution. When you look at it specifically around cyber, one that jumps to mind since we're talking about zero trust, for instance, is microsegmentation. And I know we're not going to get into a technical discussion necessarily today, but I think it is relevant to the point we're talking about around change management, because when you look at microsegmentation, which is designed to segment networks so that if an adversary gets in, they can't bounce from place to place to place. But that is a significant change management issue, because now you're talking to application owners and system administrators and network administrators, and it's going to significantly change the way they do their jobs day in and day out. We have a project going on right now as we speak where we were engaged to implement a microsegmentation tool, which on the surface sounds pretty straightforward. But when you pull back the covers and you realize you talk to network administrators and they don't even know this is coming, then you got to step back and say, okay, now let's get on a change management campaign to really help folks understand how this is going to impact their business, and most importantly, why it's going to benefit the business and the mission. And so I think this change management issue around anything cyber cannot be emphasized enough.
It's a really good point. So you bring up the point of microsegmentation, and that is such an important aspect of zero trust and coming into zero trust. Zero trust is a term that can mean anything, almost, But the bottom line is when you come to microsegmentation, that is something, because that stops the lateral movement of threats and the lateral threats that are in there. And it kind of adds to a little bit to the least privileged capability without slowing down the mission or the capability of the users. And that's so incredibly important. I mean, you can have a secure network. The most secure network I've ever seen is somebody put a computer inside a concrete box and then sealed it shut.
Right.
That was a secure computer. Didn't do much, but by golly, it was secure. You can't have that. You need to implement with what you're doing. And microsegmentation does that basically at the program level within the networks and doing it. And it works, but you have to sell it to the people that are going to own it. And that's exactly the point that you're getting at, and that's a lot of this that we're doing is what it does.
Yeah, because it certainly implements all elements of AI. For the premise of microsegmentation is you're going to limit traffic from point A to point B, or you're going to have rules and rule engines that drive and stop automatically traffic that you might not want to go from point A to point B.
But transparent to the user.
Transparent to the user,
right?
But then what we were talking about, not necessarily transparent to a network administrator who has to still, because at the end of the day, even though this automation and AI is fantastic, at the end of the day, you still need humans in the loop to look at that kind of scenario where if you're looking at a mission critical device or some other very, very highly sensitive device, you need somebody that can look at that and say, this is okay, or this is not okay. And I think that's a big part of it as well.
That's a fabulous point. Fabulous point. So for all, now this kind of bleeds right into this again. How does an organization's culture impact the adoption of zero trust principles and AI technologies? We've talked around it. We've talked aspects of all of it. But in general, how does it do it? Joe, you look like you're ready to jump on board this one. Let's go.
Well, it's not going to be simple, especially as we keep trying to automate tools. The more we get into different types of intelligent tools, we're going to have more challenges, because business processes are not designed to solve 100% of all problems. Processes, the best business process is going to solve around 95% of your problems through one workflow. So having the tools that know when to alert others is more important. Being able to have an intelligent tool that can drive reduced work on your workforce is going to create a force multiplier. And then having the tools intelligent enough to know when they don't know something.
So is there a restriction or is there something that we should build in that determines, because different tools will do different things, right? And so can the same tool be kind of have switches put on it that will tell it how far to go?
Some of them can. However, we do have to be careful of the phenomena that's coming out right now in a lot of generative AI models, that they're becoming delusional.
And that's exactly, yeah, great point. That is a great point. So, Jyoti, what cultural shifts are necessary right now to create an environment conducive to generative AI and experimentation and deployment?
So that's always a fine balance between being innovative and security. So we've actually, NIH has started a Gen AI working group or center of practice or community of practice type of initiative where we created an environment. So that's we secured to the best of our abilities. But it's also just a place where people can come to experiment, start things. It's okay if you fail, like you're not going to crash all of NIH or the world here. But, just allowing them some safe space to practice. And we did that with the cloud initiative as well when we had the whole cloud first mandate. Government, as we all know, is not the first to jump on new technology.
Really?
And there's a reason why. There's a lot at stake here. We have about 50,000 users or employees at the NIH.
Not to mention the number of people that you affect.
That you
and have a direct impact
about
on.
6,000 research institutions that depend on us, and there's people all around the world. So we wanted to kind of try to get a head start on the Gen AI initiatives, where we didn't want to wait 10 years when everybody else has already gone to the cloud. Now we're starting to go. So so we started this community practice. It's been, it's relatively new, but it allows like everyone at NIH to just get their feet wet, get their hands wet, and also share success stories or even failures. Like, oh, we tried this and that didn't work.
That's very important.
Yes.
Sharing failures is so, and that's a great. You mentioned that, and I want to jump on once again to popped in my head the idea of sharing failures. I mean, that is so important within an organization, not just within, but in sharing with others also. So you're promoting that within NIH, is
Yes.
the sharing of your failures. It's not something negative. It's actually something positive that we can all learn from. That's fantastic.
And to add on to that, I would say each of us should have our own personal board of advisors. And what do I mean by that is sometimes as security officers, we might feel like, okay, something went on in our organization that we're not too proud of, or maybe it could have been prevented, but we're just going to keep it hush hush and we're not going to tell anyone because no one has ever experienced this before. And then we start, trusting our own board of advisors, and we start talking like, oh yeah, this happened to us, and this is how we took care of it. I'm like, oh, okay. So, so I would say, the more knowledge sharing we can have within our organizations, or even between organizations, between government organizations and also industry, I think we can all collectively do well together.
Yeah, that's incredible. Go ahead, Joe.
That's something that the military and flight operations have in common, is we have mishap reporting. I've always found it amazing how people don't want to share their bad experiences. And I'm the first person now who will always say, write it up, let's share it out there, let's get it, whether it's going to a safety officer, it's going to a security officer, so that you can learn from that and prevent that in the future.
Yeah, it's like a grape sheet in an aircraft. You never don't complain about or don't share information that goes wrong. Or if you make a mistake in there, you never don't share that. I mean, that's safety of flight. You have to. So as well, you want to add on to this, Tony? I mean, the idea of experimentation and operational implementation, with that balance that's in there, how important is that?
Oh, it's critical. You have to have that balance, and because on one hand you want to have a balance or a focus on innovation, and you want to promote, for example, hackathons to get your team members to be thinking about how to apply AI and what are the different use cases, and be creative and all that kind of innovation. And on the flip side, like what Matt was saying earlier, in terms of balancing the business need and the security need, you still need to have a culture of security. To make sure that even though we're doing all these fantastic things, that you still have a security model in place. To give you a quick example, there was an example recently where we were in a meeting where an organization's CIO was talking about all these wonderful use cases that we're moving forward with. And the CISO just happened to be a couple seats down and said, well, time out. Wait a minute. What are you doing here again? And so it showed a really good push-pull in terms of making sure you've got that innovative spirit, but you also got this concept of governance and trusted AI, because they really do need to balance each other out. If you get to one way or the other, you're going to have some challenges.
That's fantastic. Anybody else with thoughts? Okay, then let's move on. And so the next one, Joe, this is, I love this question. It is perfect for you. Now, publicly, almost everyone claims to embrace change, okay? And almost nobody actually does. So what are some obstacles that resistance to change can cause to the successful implementation of major projects and programs? And what are some ideas maybe to turn this around? I mean, we've never worked for a boss, have we, that says, I'm all for change as long as I can keep doing things the way I want to. What do you think?
It's very difficult to get culture to change. And no matter what you do, if you put in change that is going to be heavily resistant to the culture of your organization, it's never going to succeed. Everyone has seen that at every organization. I mean, some of the best examples I have are prior in my business experience, where, again, great idea, great opportunity, reduce workflow, cost to employees by 50%, but they were very comfortable doing what they did. So as you're moving that forward, you have to build the understanding into cultural change that you're going to have those workers who are going to be very comfortable in their roles and their jobs. So you've got to give them that psychological safety that they're going to have more work to do. We're going to actually build in more challenging aspects to their role so that they understand that nothing is going to truly change their job and their goals and the mission of the organization. What you're going to do is you're going to implement a technology tool that's going to aid them to do their job better with a higher reliability and a higher safeguard for safety. The way that we've been doing that in VA, and again, this is a program that Craig Lugart had implemented back over 15 years ago, was innovations.
Wow.
So VHA and VA as a whole have an innovation arm that's set up with funding so that they can start small projects. They can actually accept projects from the local medical center or clinic, and then they can figure out how to get it to work at scale. And once they do get it to be functional at scale, not going to be perfect. It's going to be an out there project. But once they get it so that the back end could support more than one small clinic, they start rolling it out, and that actually gets for seed funding. And then it will go to spread funding, where you're going to move it among a region or move it among geographically varied medical centers. Because healthcare, at the end of the day, a lot of healthcare is local.
You know, it's really interesting because as a user of the VA healthcare system, I've seen this change. I've seen how it's progressed and the great strides that the VA has taken over the past several years. And it's really fabulous. And you're explaining that just now kind of falls in line with what I've seen, and it makes sense for how it is. How about like Matt, for the private sector, this is so incredibly important. How does it work within the private? Joe was saying that he saw resistance to change in his job in the private sector before, but change is critical to the success of private sector. The embrace of change is how you get the products out there and how you do this. So what do you think? You and Tony, I'd be interested to hear what you're thinking.
Yeah, I think change is absolutely critical, and there's a couple of things we do to help promote that. One is just the natural churn of workforce in the private sector. There is more mobility of workforce from organization to organization to organization than I saw when I was in public service. This is always bringing in fresh new ideas, fresh ways of thinking about problems. And if you have a culture that embraces the idea wherever it may come from in the organization, you can really capitalize on some of these ideas. Mm-hmm. When I worked for the government, I found we were more of an internally focused organization. We had a lot of the same talent moving jobs, so they'd get new perspectives, but there's a lot of the same people moving jobs. And so that's been one of the refreshing things to me in the private sector, is this constant inflow of new ideas, new experiences, new cultures, and new things we can capitalize on. And I think it's one of the things we really try to take advantage of.
Outstanding. Tony?
No question. I agree everything what Matt said. I think it's also, again, finding that balance of transparency and making sure team members feel empowered, that they can take action, whether it's coming up with ideas around an AI model, for instance, or But the flip side is the transparency from leadership to show our support and make sure that they feel like their ideas are going to be valued, and then elevating that.
That is absolutely perfect, because that you did the perfect segue right into Matt's next question. Following that line of thought, Matt, how can leaders promote a culture of curiosity, learning, and risk-taking when integrating AI solutions in a zero trust environment?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I want to pull on a couple of the things we've heard about already today. Jyoti talked about educating the entire workforce on their role in having a secure organization, whether it's a doctor or an IT professional. They know what role they have. So do you start with an organization where people know the rules, they embrace them, there's a culture of trust, but also a culture of accountability? I think that's foundational to be willing to take some risk and experiment. Tony then talked about microsegmentation a bit later. And no matter how good your people are, do you have a control environment where if there is a mistake, the risks are limited to that very small environment? You take well-educated people that you know when train and trust and have accountability. You take an IT environment that allows for relatively risk-free experimentation, and you really lay the groundwork for some really powerful opportunities here. So for example, just to give a really simplistic example, 15, 18 months ago, ChatGPT was becoming all the rage, like overnight, boom. And day after day after day, you'd see a new headline of organizations, we're blocking access to this, it's scary, we don't know what to do with it. We took a radically different approach. We put a splash page up anytime you tried to go to it. And it said, please remember, we are only allowed to use approved technology solutions to use firm data, client data, service our clients, meet professional standards. This is not an approved IT solution. Here are policies, here you can go to if you have any questions. But embrace this, learn it, experiment, play, see how this works, because we want you learning about it.
How smart that was. It's the fastest growing program that's ever hit the airways out there.
And so while some organizations were taking a very risk-averse approach to the unknown, we took an approach that said, you're right, it's completely unknown. So let's make sure it can't cause harm while we learn about it. And we had 3 real material benefits. One, we were able to quickly see the value of this technology and build business cases for why we wanted to create a secure internal instantiation that we could use to mature our organization. 2, we understood the risks in real time. We were experimenting. It wasn't the hype and fear and paranoia. It was real things we were seeing. And that helped us build the right firm governance of security professionals and ethics professionals and legal professionals and everyone we would need to have the right internal governance to adopt these. And 3rd, because we were getting smart quickly, when clients came to us and said, hey, we're thinking about this, do you have any thoughts? Yes, because we've already been playing with it and learning all of these things. And we could take the business case logic, the risk logic, the governance logic, and help others adopt, because we were willing to take that risk and experiment in a safe way early.
That's fantastic. Anybody else want to add to that? That sounded really good. I mean, that sounded like fun and like the really smart way to go, because like I said, the ChatGPT was probably one of the fastest adapted programs that have ever hit the airways out there, quite on.
Sure, I can add something.
Go ahead. Yeah, please.
So I think ChatGPT, just like any other new technologies, when it first came about, like you were saying, Matt, as security professionals, we often get a bad rep as the naysayers or the no-sayers. Nope, we can't use that, can't use that because we don't know too much about it. However, we tend to not keep in mind that people are going to use it regardless, unless you put an official blacklisting, which a lot of times we can't, because otherwise we'll be blacklisting everything. So what we found also to be helpful is, instead of just saying no to something, it's a yes and, where yes, you can use it with these caveats in mind or within these boundaries, or it's a yes, I understand your need to what kind of functionality needs you're looking for, and no, you can't use this product, but you can use this other product instead. So I think it took us a while to come to that realization, because otherwise it was just like, nope, you can't use this, you can't use Dropbox, you can't use this other tool, you can't use this and that. And then when people ask, well, what are we supposed to use? Oftentimes we're silent. So now we've kind of grow in our own maturity in our own culture as cyber leaders, and understanding, oh, what is it that you're trying to do? Let us find you a different way of still achieving your goals, but maybe not using this, but using this instead.
That is such a smart thing, because I found out in many years of being in government and in military also, is that regardless, okay, your folks are going to find a way to do the mission and get it done. Okay. And if you don't provide them the tools or allow them to use the tools, they're going to find their own way around it and to get it done. You don't want that to happen. So you're working with them now to provide them and find out, not saying no, not no, yes. It's how can I help you accomplish your mission? That they'll understand. Just a flat no, they won't. That's fantastic.
The interesting considerations, and Joe and Tony both talked about it with sort of where is the data coming from and how can we trust the data, really introduces a different aspect of trust and business risk here. In the past, we'd have logic in a system. 4 + 4 is going to equal 8. It's going to equal 8 tomorrow. It's going to equal 8 the next day. You start to use some of these new systems that can almost think they operate differently. They're retraining themselves constantly based on inputs. The answer you get today, tomorrow, and the next day might all three be different. How are you supposed to respond as an organization? What do you do with that? Is that good or bad? And I think if you're dealing with some very subjective inputs, it can be good. It can get smarter. It can build upon itself. But if you're dealing with very objective inputs, it could be really, really dangerous that you're getting those different outputs. And so you have to think differently about governance and accountability and how you're providing human checks and balances on the outputs of these systems to make sure that what they're giving you is something you can rely on and take action based on.
When you're thinking of literal answers and literal equations, can you put hard checks in there and program them in order to ensure that it feeds you not a subjective idea, but the actual objective answer? And like you were talking about earlier, Tony, is put a stop when it happens and bring it that way.
So I certainly think you can, and I think we've seen that from most of the enterprise quality AI solutions that are out there. But we also see jailbreaking of those algorithms where, despite those safeguards, if you ask certain questions in certain ways, you can typically make these systems ignore those rules and give you an answer that is contrary to some of what those guardrails are. So I think those guardrails are possible, but they're not foolproof.
Okay, interesting. It probably also depends upon who's asking the question and what their motive is in doing it. So very good points. So Jyoti, aside from our ethical considerations, okay, what are some possible objections to the establishment of a Gen AI supported zero trust environment that we should be aware of, and how do we overcome that?
So I feel like this is just yet another concept, just like any other change management principle that there is. Any new technology comes down the pipeline, or there's a mandate to do something from OMB or other bodies. It just adds a sense of anxiety and fear because we don't know too much about it.
OMB, IRS. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I've forgotten all my IRS stuff. And that's not a knock on the IRS. No, don't know IRS.
Acronyms.
We love you both. We love
I
you
forgot
all.
my CIA stuff, but it's because they flash things at me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jyoti. Go ahead.
No worries. I feel like this is just something else, just like all the other tools, technologies, mandates that have come through the pipeline, where it starts with change management, starts with a holistic and integrative approach to people, the process, like technologies, creating a champions type of environment in your within your workforce. And we call them cyber champions for our other initiatives. But this is yet another cyber champions type of initiatives, education, building awareness, and also giving them the safe area to play around with. Starting small. Don't start with your most crucial high value asset systems and try to do things with that. Maybe start small, or maybe take a portion of that system. We can play around with this data. As maybe it's a publicly available data. If something goes wrong, it's okay. We have backup systems in place. And I would say, so start small. Use your typical change management procedures. empower your people, give them some space to be innovative and creative, but yet somewhat secure as well. And then I think the same principles apply for Gen AI and zero trust as well.
Joe, this kind of goes in with what you're saying before about starting small, starting down at the local level and building it up and testing. But I'm also thinking to myself, what an incredible time to own an isolated test bed where you can just bring in whatever toys that you want and play with them and build it and then work it and then release it and bring it out. So what do you think along those lines, Joe? Does this kind of match with what you're doing or what you've seen?
Well, our innovation we're putting onto cloud service providers. So again, as we keep driving that, we want to be able to leverage at scale. Because if we build something that can handle 100 users, that's not going to help us very well when we start talking about 20 million veterans and 800,000 warm bodies that support VA efforts. Mm-hmm. So that we've always got to be thinking of how we can make something into an enterprise, but we do have local test beds. The Innovation Center down in Orlando is one of them.
Right. Orlando Innovation Test Center. Good idea. So, Joe, Governor, I'm going to stay with you for a second. What cultural norms should guide AI development to prevent what we're talking about, the biases, and protect user privacy?
So the way the current generation of tool set is being implemented, they're going to generate some biases because we're relying on the tool itself to resolve things. That's where we do have to develop those workflows as we talked about earlier so that it can off-ramp. It can get a human more involved. And you wouldn't want, especially in healthcare, you wouldn't want a workflow to think that it is perfect.
Right.
That would cause the potential for gross harm and negligence to occur if you rely on the technology.
I think Jyoti would agree with you on that too.
So as we observe workflows that are going to work around their own problem sets, maintaining privacy becomes even more important. So having the data controls around it, ensuring that people are understanding that the data controls between FISMA moderate and FISMA high, detecting abnormalities within your data sets, within your network packets, and then having that intrusion detection monitoring, shutting things down is critical.
So, Jyoti, I was saying you agree with this. What you have to add to that? What would you think? I mean, it's you bring it in, it's there. Where do you go with it?
So, I think it's it all comes down to a level of trust and experimentation. So you're going to make mistakes. You're going to fail, but fail forward. Right. I always have a theory where never let a good disaster go to waste. So take the lessons learned and see what could have been prevented, but don't harp on. I know a lot of times when we have a crisis at place, we tend to be like, oh, who did what wrong? But maybe there was things that were done incorrectly or could have done better. But take those lessons and move forward. Maybe there weren't processes in place. So it's just kind of what can we learn from this? Do we have to do more education to our people? Do we have to build the processes? A lot of times I think we're still trying to deal with legacy systems, especially in the government. And things that weren't done before. So the people have things in their mind that they didn't write down, and then when that person leaves, now all of the information is gone.
Oh, that's so dangerous too. It happens every day, though, doesn't it?
Right. So do we need to do a better job documenting things? Do we need to have these processes? Is there cross sharing of information like across your organization or organizations? Matt and I were talking earlier about our experiences with the Intel world, and where each Intel agency has their own knowledge and data, but they're not really willing to share it with the other party. But if we kind of work collectively together, we can do a lot more.
And that's something the ODNI has been working on since 2005, late 2005. So definitely, and it's something that we have seen in the intelligence community of how critically important it is to share the information across boundaries, to be collaborative in nature of what we're doing. And what Joe was talking about earlier about the built-in biases that are coming in there. Matt, what do you think on this? I mean, if you build in, if the biases are there, I don't want to say you failed, but the fact is, if we're building in biases, we need to find a way to cleanse that, don't we?
Yeah, I think so. And some of this is a challenge between, are you an organization building an AI model? Are you an organization consuming an AI model built by somebody else? And if you're in the latter category, which many organizations are, right? They're buying from these hyperscale AI companies. It becomes harder and harder to influence the logic in the algorithm itself. But for those who are building, these considerations are absolutely paramount to make sure it's built with these things in mind. And Joe earlier talked about some of the internal governance organizations they have within VA, and I think not just having governance, but having the right people at the table, whether it's a chief ethics official, a chief privacy official, all the right representatives, so you can make sure these things are being considered. And then when something goes wrong, was that an anomaly, or did we have the wrong control framework and we need to rethink how we're governing or regulating this, right? And so I think you have to be willing to look at what happened, right? That issue sheet we talked about before.
Yeah.
And then say, is this systemic or is this a one-time anomaly?
Well, you're also talking about biases like they're a bad thing. In healthcare, biases may not be a bad thing, because if you build a tool that is biased, but it gives you the best cancer diagnosis and treatment possible because it understands cancer patients that well, that would be a biased tool, but it has an out product that actually is going to be substantial and profitable. If you have a biased tool that can work for a segment of the population very well, that bias can be taken advantage of, versus having a general bias. So there's a different viewpoint of biases that you want to
It
observe.
depends upon your definition of bias,
Yeah.
and which definition you're using. Very good point. Very good point, Joe. Appreciate that. So, so Matt, how can transparency, you were talking about this just a little bit just now, but how can transparency and accountability, okay, be woven into the fabric of an organization's culture when it's implementing its AI?
Yeah, I think this is just a natural extension of the last conversation about privacy and ethics, and now we're talking about transparency and accountability. In fact, our organization has published 10 different tenets that we are going to look for as part of any AI use, any AI model, anything we're doing in the marketplace.
And you allow that, you've published it, so it's available for anybody to use,
We've
am I right?
published it. It's on our website. These are the things we are saying we believe in as we adopt these models.
Free tool.
And ethics, ethics, privacy, accountability, transparency, all four happen to be on there,
Right.
with the very first one being transparency. You have to be willing to talk about what you're doing, talk about these technologies in a way that disarms people who might be concerned about them or unsure about them or not as familiar with them as you are. And that accountability is key. Also, we've talked throughout the day of how do you have the appropriate human regulator, human governance on the outputs to make sure they are ethical, trusted, accurate, whatever the right term you want to use there is.
Uh-huh.
And so I believe these two tenets plus the two we just talked about are foundational to any organization's adoption of AI.
Those are great points. Anybody else want to add? Okay. Oh, you kind of hit it right there. So, so Tony, we're gonna close out with you, but then I want everybody to jump in on this, if you would. What do you envision as the most challenging cybersecurity challenges going on as we go forward? I mean, what are the most challenging ones as we go forward with the wide adaptation and use of Gen AI? And what can we do to address those?
So
But once again, you get the easy question.
Yeah.
But-
So the one that we've talked a lot about, a lot of these challenges, but the one that really jumps to mind is our adversaries are generally one step ahead of us from the perspective of they don't care about privacy. They don't care about governance. And so we're always trying to play catch up to a certain extent. So I think having just good blocking and tackling, good cyber fundamentals, I don't think ever goes out of style. You know, making sure you've got good access rights, segregation of duties, you mentioned earlier, least privilege. These concepts have been around forever and they're going to continue to be around forever because I think they still apply very much in the AI model, and certainly zero trust concepts can help with that. But I think that's still, at the end of the day, the number one challenge is trying to stay as with our adversaries are at one step ahead. And then secondary challenges are things we've talked about. And I'd love to get Joe and Jyoti's perspective because we haven't talked a lot about privacy and the privacy risks around these models, but certainly privacy is a big one. And then we talked about change management. That's just going to be an ongoing effort that you have to make sure you get all the things we talked about earlier. And then I think if you can do all of that, then you're going to be in a pretty good place.
Well, it's really interesting too. You bring up you bring up the tools, and really what, especially in terms of okay, we had machine language and AI, but when we're coming into Gen AI, a lot of the measures that we take right now that are manual can be automated. I mean, we can look at it and say, okay, and I'm not talking about taking the aspects away from the human, but being able to bring up to the human, said, hey, you have this issue. Look at it now. And it's such a much more rapid response that it's able to protect your networks better, right?
Yeah, and actually you bring up another risk that I didn't think of to mention here, but I think there's a natural threat from a lot of our team members when we talk about AI, because their first inclination is my job's going away. And that's
wrong.
And that's not it at all. So trying to make sure they feel empowered to be innovative and come up with these ideas, because the thought, as we've talked about a number of times, the human in the loop is not going away. What we want to do is elevate the human in the loop to get not necessarily eyes on glass for low risk transactions, low risk traffic, but to elevate those really smart people to be dealing with bigger mission critical types of decisions and topics.
Yep, absolutely. Now you brought up privacy. I mean, that's huge. Joe, I see you're chomping at bits. Go for it.
Well, for this one, I definitely agree with the concern on the cultural aspects. And most people are not understanding that as we start putting these tools out, everyone has complained that their security workforce is lacking enough people. So to be able to operate at a higher level, to get potentially more job satisfaction because what you're getting from the tool is going to actually drive you to a result, or for you to be able to go down a branch. I mean, there's compromises that have occurred in networks where a bad actor has been in a network for days, weeks, months, or even years at some points. And all of that was complained upon that we didn't have enough time to identify those risks. So by putting these tools in place and using them economically, as well as to use them at their appropriate level, is going to allow our workforce to be a force multiplier.
I think we were talking earlier when we were talking about Chat GPT, and you were talking, Matt, just get out there and use it. And just do it. It's the adaptation of this new technology that's out there. You just got to get out there and use it. I mean, and Gen AI is the same. I mean, it's exactly the same thing. It applies to Gen AI. Is that you got to get out there and use it, become comfortable with it, and once you realize what it is, you're going to realize it's not taking anything away from you. What it is that tool that you've always wanted. It's that thing that's going to help you do your job that you've always wanted. It's not taking it away from you. So yeah, those are great points. Josie, what do you think on the privacy aspect, though? I mean, you and Joe, probably between HIPAA and other regulations that are out there, that you have some of the most stringent privacy regulations that exist. Can this help you, or does it add another layer of risk for you?
So yes and yes.
There you go.
And there's quite a few points that Tony made that I would love to piggyback off of. So talking about privacy, yes. So, as a healthcare organization, just like the VA, we do have to be mindful of patient safety, but also patient security and privacy as well. So making sure that our patients understand how we're using the data, where do we get the data from, but also do we have their consent on using it, and being just fully transparent and open and honest with them. And some patients, may not want their data to be used, and we have to be okay with that. So, not trying to force them to, like, well, we really want to do this and we need your data. Because they might not want to share their data at this point, we don't know how it's going to be used either. If it gets out there, is there a risk of maybe insurance companies knowing about your condition, or is there other, there could be future consequences that we don't necessarily have an idea at this point. So we do have to be very mindful in privacy. But Tony, you mentioned another point in workforce. To me, it sounded like workforce retention concerns and anxiety. And I think all of us have staff that have a sense of anxiety. Well, what does that mean to my job? However, I feel like this is just the same way that a lot of what we do now before were manual processes being done manually by a person delivering a letter to you because there was no email systems back in the day. So I do feel eventually we do have to take a look at what kind of workforce do we need in the direction that we're going. Can Gen AI or any sort of automation help us to automate things that are being manually done now? But at some point, at the end of it, we do need human interaction or involvement or oversight. However, there might be a lot of things that can be done automatically that we don't need someone to hand deliver things or to look at each and every alert or vulnerability. Maybe some of things can be automated.
You bring up some great ideas and great analogies here. Think about it for a second. Remember the carbon paper that used to go between sheets of paper as you're on your typewriter typing and stuff, and then the Xerox machine came around? I mean, did that put anybody out of work? Not really. I mean, what about when word processing came about on the computer, and we started doing that instead of manual typewriters doing each one and then sending out email? Did that get rid of our administrative assistants? Did you not need as many? No, hell, you needed more actually when it came around to it. So we're not getting rid of jobs. We're actually creating them most likely.
Mm-hmm.
So that's absolutely fantastic. Any other closing thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, just think bringing this back to the last question you asked about some of the biggest challenges out there. I love what Joe's saying. It's the dream of cyber professionals that this is going to let us find the things we either didn't have the capacity or capability to find before. Yay, it's going to automate lots of that. The bad guys are using it too.
Yep.
Right? So as we get better, they're getting better. And as Tony mentioned, they don't have the governance, they don't have the legal, they don't have the this. They're going to get better faster. All right. And if we go all the way back to the beginning of this conversation, talking about security in business lexicon, right? As I talk with business leaders, I talk about think like this is maintaining market share. If you want to grow as fast as your competitor, if you want to maintain your current market share, you've got to grow with them. If you want to take market share, you've got to grow faster than them. So if we're not content with our current security, we don't have to just maintain the ridiculously fast velocity of the bad guys. We have to exceed that, and we have to leapfrog them and get ahead of them. And that's a really hard thing to do. And so, yes, we might not need as many people eyes on glass. We're going to need them doing radically different things to keep up with the radically changing threat. And I think that's simultaneously the most challenging part of the profession and the most rewarding. It's changing every day, and the problems we get to help businesses solve today are different than the problems we'll get to help them solve tomorrow.
It's ever changing. It's ever evolving. And what the good thing about it, though, is I think you'll all agree with me, is that the senior leadership, at the C-suite level, are starting to understand that now. And they're giving the resources and giving the attention to security and cybersecurity especially that needs to be there. So that's really great. With that, folks, I think we are flat out of time. I hate to say it, but you guys have absolutely been fantastic. Thank you so much. This has been a blast. Thank you.
Thank you.